When I wanted to grow my business fast, I implemented this. I call it the defensive line, and it's what protects you from everything that's vying for your attention but isn't core to you making progress in your business. Here's why I want you to do it. Now, over 15 years ago, when I was starting a business, I was spending all my time being reactive. I was answering emails at all hours. I was taking meetings whenever someone asked for one, and I really had no control over my calendar. And what happened? As a result of that, my business was stuck because even if I had an hour or two that was uninterrupted and I was trying to make progress, mentally I was exhausted and waiting for the next interruption. When I realized this, I put in place the rules here for the defensive line. And the feeling that I got from having this set of rules, which protected me from everything, like I can't tell you how great that is. So I want that for you. So I'm going to give you those rules in this video. And at the end of it, I'm going to talk about how you can put these in place, even if you have pretty much nothing to spend and you don't have an assistant and there's nothing fancy going on. It's really just a set of rules about how you interact with anyone from the outside world. And what it does is it changes you from an interrupt-driven business to a proactive and planned business. Now, what do I mean by interrupt-driven business? An interrupt-driven business is that you're working on something and then something can come in from the outside and interrupt whatever you're doing and cause you to pay attention to that thing. So it is essentially kind of like your email inbox, which I've heard joked is like a big list, a to-do list that's made by other people. You don't ask for anything to come into your email box. It just comes in there and all of a sudden someone else has given you a to-do. So it's kind of like that. How do you change from an interrupt-driven business into a planned business? Before we jump into the rules, there's a really important distinction that your team might be interrupt driven. And in fact, if they're helping you with this, they will be interrupt driven. And that's if it's necessary, they might be interrupt driven. So they might need to answer the phone. They might need to get back to an email quickly, but you should never be. That's the distinction. So this defensive line is a set of rules for your meetings, for your messages, and for your calendar. And each of these three areas, the messages and the meetings and the calendar, has three rules to follow. And if you follow these rules, you'll be more productive than you've ever been. So here's how to protect yourself with the defensive line. First, three rules about phone and meetings. Now, the first rule is there should be no unscheduled calls or meetings. Every single call that you have, whether it's internally or it is externally with a customer, a client, or something like that, has to be pre-scheduled and in a designated time slot in your calendar. In other words, we're going to talk about calendar in a second, but you're going to have certain time slots in your calendar, which are for meetings. And what you want is nobody other than your designated staff, and certain staff members can call your cell phone, and they can only do it, and you should only do it in an emergency. So what we're doing here is we're making sure that you're not being reactive and you can't have people interrupting like this interrupt-driven thing. Now, I understand there might be an occasional emergency and you might have to train your staff about what's really an emergency, what's not. To me, real emergency is someone's stolen our money. There's a fire in the building. Someone is suing us. Those might be real emergencies, but pretty much everything else can wait, and that can be put in a designated slot in the calendar for a meeting. So you're going to want to follow that principle of having no unscheduled meetings. So number one, no unscheduled meetings, and they have to be pre-scheduled and designated time slots in your calendar. And third, nobody is reaching you on your mobile phone other than in a true emergency. So those are the rules around the interruption there. Now, the second is three rules about messages. So number one, your message notifications need to be turned off everywhere. You don't want messages going off on your computer, going off on your phone, like all these little alerts. If you've got one of those fancy Apple Watch things, like notifications go off, silence all of them, 100% of them. Again, you don't want to be interrupted. When you're being interrupted, you're saying that someone else's priorities are more important than your own priorities. And what that's going to say is that your company is less important than their perceived crisis now. So turn off every notification. Second of all, you want to filter all messages before they get to you. So you don't want to have messages that are just a whole big line of like, oh, there's a newsletter, there's like some notification from some software that you've gotten, all this stuff going on email. You want to filter all of those out before they get to you. Now, you can do that either by having an assistant working in your inbox, or you can set some rules in your email client about what you see and what you don't see. But in either way, you want to filter out the messages so you're only seeing the important things. And then third, importantly, you're only checking those messages at designated times. So you're not going into your email and checking it because, oh, I've got nothing else to do. And then it becomes this OCD loop where it's like, oh, I got to check if I have an email. Oh, nothing? Okay, great. Oh, there's some stuff. Oh, I'll get distracted with that. You check email at designated times. So if you've done this, these three rules about messages, you're not being interrupted all the time. number one. Number two, the messages are filtered. So you're not seeing everything. You're not seeing all the garbage that's in there. You're seeing the more important stuff. And number three, you're only checking it at designated times. So you're not interrupting your day and letting some of those to-dos of other people interrupt your calendar. And while we're talking about calendar, we're going to go into the 3 rules about the calendar. The first is to time block everything with designated slots in the calendar. Whether that is, this is my time for meetings, this is my time for focus work, this is my time when I'm doing interviews, this is the time I'm doing my podcast, whatever it is, everything needs a designated slot instead of leaving everything open. I mean, I recently had a situation where I was starting to do some sales calls and we had an automated calendar and the calendar was popping these sales calls into my calendar, that automated Calendly like was popping them on there. So I get these little calls sprinkled throughout the week and it was completely the opposite of what I should be doing. I was not practicing what I preached. In that moment, I realized it and I disabled that software, and meetings can only come in at specific times, because the last thing you need is a 6-hour block where you really think you can be productive and really make the company go forward. And then all of a sudden you've got this thing that appears right in the middle of it and just completely breaks your focus. So you have to time block everything with specific designated slots. And then second, your available time for scheduled calls are on that calendar and your assistant knows when they are. Okay, so you've blocked it and your assistant knows where they are. Or if you're using some calendaring software, you're using different calendar links so that people are only jumping into the correct blocks. And third and finally, your planner is checked and updated the first thing and the last thing in the day. This is something that will give you a huge sense of control. When you show up in the morning, you're going to look at what your calendar is, and I consider the calendar the source of truth. In other words, that is what I'm doing in the given day, instead of the calendar as a suggestion for what I might be doing. If instead I know that those are what I call the hard contours of the day, it's going to be much easier in the beginning of the day to look at it and say, this is what I'm doing today. And at the end of the day, I can look at my calendar for the next day and say, do I want to be doing all of those things? Do I need to juggle things around anymore? Do I need to adjust what I'm doing? Have someone jump to my calendar and they shouldn't be there, and I need to fix that as a systems issue. So if you follow those 3 sets of 3 rules, then you will have far more control. Your business will actually go far further and faster than if you did. And you can do this whether or not you have an assistant. I mentioned earlier that this can be done on a shoestring budget, right? If you have an assistant, that's a great way to do it, because they can take care of the communication, they can take care of the calendar, and they can own those things. But even if you don't have that and you are on a super tight budget, you can use meeting scheduling software like a Calendly or a TidyCal or something like that to give different meeting links to different kinds of people to slot them into the right places. You can also use email filtering rules to make sure that things are going to the right place. For instance, one of my favorites is if you search for the word unsubscribe in any email and then shuttle that off into a special folder. Well, think about it. What has unsubscribe links in it? Mostly newsletters, right? Now, you can't do that forever because you have to check it and make sure that they're not just going into the void, because sometimes someone will forward you something with an unsubscribe link. So it's a pretty good measure and it's a good first pass at it. Not as good as having an assistant, but it's a way you can leverage technology with zero budget in order to do that. So here's the bottom line. This concept is not hard. I've given you the rules. What's hard is sticking to it. We all fall off of these organizational patterns, which are really helping us from time to time. I mean, I admitted fully that I know these rules. I've been using them for 15 plus years. But what happened recently is I let something come into there and put something on my calendar, and I had to check myself and say, wait a minute, this is not the way to make progress. And I fixed it. So if you do this, it's going to make success far, far less hard. It's going to make you feel much more organized. So that's the defensive line. I want to hear how it works for you.